Growing up, I had everything money could buy, vast estates, a last name that opened every door, even neighbours from royalty. My childhood home was on the Queen's own estate. Princes were my playmates. But all that wealth couldn't fill the silence in those grand hallways, or answer the one question that echoed in my heart every day. Yes, I had everything. Yet every afternoon I found myself waiting on the doorstep for the one thing I couldn't have, my mother. She promised she would come back for me, but she never did. This is the story of how that broken promise, that deep wound of abandonment, forced me to truly understand what family means. It showed me how the deepest pain can teach you everything you need to know about love. My earliest memories are coloured by privilege. I was born a Spencer, part of an aristocratic family that had been close to the royal family for generations. We lived at Park House, a beautiful home on the Sandringham estate. That meant the Queen wasn't just a monarch, she was our landlady and a familiar face in our world. From the outside, my childhood seemed absolutely idyllic. We had vast lawns to play on, ponies to ride, and nannies who catered to our every need. First came my older sisters, Sarah and Jane, then me, and finally my little brother Charles. To the outside world we seemed impossibly lucky, a perfect portrait of aristocratic life. But portraits are flat. They don't show the cracks beneath the surface. Even before everything fell apart, you could sense the strain. My parents faced intense pressure for a male heir, and it weighed heavily on their marriage. A year before I was born, they lost their infant son, John, a tragedy that left a scar on our family that never truly faded. When I was born a girl, the disappointment in the room was colder than any Norfolk winter. My father had desperately hoped for a boy to carry on the Spencer name. That sense of being a disappointment, of not being what was wanted, settled deep inside me long before I even had words for it. My mother, Frances, was a figure of remarkable beauty, and to me incredible distance. I remember her mostly as a lingering scent of perfume, the soft rustle of a silk dress, and a perfectly composed smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was someone to admire, but not someone you could truly hold on to. My brother Charles once said that our mother just wasn't cut out for maternity. Maybe that's the kindest way to put it. She wasn't cruel, she just couldn't do it. She was deeply in love with someone else, and for her, the gilded cage of our family was still just a cage. The final break happened when I was about 7 years old, and the word divorce became a scary, unfamiliar sound in our home. The separation in 1967 marked a painful and public rupture in what seemed like our perfect world. What I remember most isn't the details, but the feeling, a deep, churning sense that the ground beneath my feet was no longer solid. In my diary, I later described my childhood as very unhappy and very unstable. I remember always seeing my mother cry while my father never talked to us about what was happening. We quickly learned not to ask questions. After my parents first separated, I lived with my mother in London for a while. But at Christmas, when we visited our father, he refused to let me return to her. What followed was a bitter custody battle. In a painful twist, my own maternal grandmother sided with my father, helping him win full custody of us. Just like that, my world was split in two. With my older sisters away at boarding school, it was mostly just my brother Charles and me left to navigate this strange, broken new reality on our own. As he would later say, we were in it together. The grand house, which once stood as a symbol of our status, now felt more like a holding pen. It was filled with a revolving door of nannies I resented, each one seeming to try to replace the mother I'd lost. All the material comforts remained, but the emotional heart of our family was gone, replaced by a quiet, cavernous ache. This wasn't a fairy tale, and at the center of that ache burned a single hope that my mother would come back. The most powerful memories aren't always the big events. Sometimes it's the small, quiet moments that linger the longest. For me, the sharpest memory is the sound of tires crunching on gravel. That sound meant a car was arriving, a sound filled with hope. After my mother left, that became the rhythm of my days, a daily cycle of hope and disappointment. My brother remembers watching her pack her things to leave. She looked at me. I was just 5 years old and promised she would come back. To a child, a mother's promise is the most sacred thing. So I waited. I sat on the cold stone step at Park House, my little legs dangling, eyes fixed on the long driveway. I waited with the pure faith only a child has. I believed her. I really did believe that at any moment her car would appear, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and she'd step out to sweep me up in her arms. Waiting wasn't just passing time, it was all I could feel and think about. The chill from the stones seeped up through my dress. In winter, I'd trace patterns in the frost on the windows, watching the road beyond through the warped glass. I remember how the light would change throughout the day, how the shadows from the great trees grew longer and longer as afternoon turned into evening. Each shadow was a silent reminder of time passing without her. My brother Charles remembers this ritual too. He once said Diana used to wait on the doorstep for her, but she never came. He remembers hearing me crying down the corridor at night, but being too afraid of the dark to come comfort me. We were just two small children, each lost in our own grief, inside the same huge, empty house. The silence was the loudest sound I knew, filled with the echo of a broken promise and the heavy weight of her absence. There were visits, of course. Custody arrangements meant she wasn't gone completely, but those weekends came with their own kind of pain. I remember her crying on Saturday nights, telling us how much she didn't want us to leave the next day. For a child, it was devastating. A storm of emotions, confusing and hard to understand, when all I really wanted was one thing: a home. Her visits were fleeting, and that only made her absence feel even sharper. It wasn't the permanent return I had longed for. It wasn't the fulfillment of that promise made at the doorstep. What truly shaped the woman I'd become wasn't just one single moment. It was the slow and painful erosion of hope, day after day. It was the weight of all those afternoons, sitting and waiting for a car that never appeared in the driveway. Every evening that ended with that empty driveway left another small crack in my heart. The hardest part was realizing I wasn't her priority. My mother was in love with someone else, building a new life that didn't include being a full-time mother in a country house. The logic behind adult desires is impossible for a child to understand. All I knew was the ache of being left behind. I felt like I wasn't enough to make her stay, like I wasn't enough for her to come back to. That sense of abandonment became part of who I was. It was a deep, crippling wound that stayed with me for the rest of my life. The image of the girl on the doorstep never really faded. She lingered in my mind, always reminding me of that early loss, of that primal fear of being unwanted. But even in the shadow of abandonment, something else began to take root. If I couldn't be the one someone waited for, then I would have to become the one who waited, the one who watched, the one who protected. My attention shifted from the empty driveway to the small, vulnerable boy down the hall, just as lost as I was. The void left by a mother's absence is powerful and hungry. It can swallow you whole, or it can force you to build something to fill it. For me, I built a fierce, unwavering devotion to my younger brother, Charles. With our older sisters away at school, it often felt like it was just the two of us against the world. He was only 2 or 3 when our mother left. His confusion lingered in our quiet home, a constant low hum of anxiety. His vulnerability reached out to a part of me I didn't know existed. My own pain, as overwhelming as it felt, had to be set aside. Someone needed to be the grown-up, and since there was no one else, I decided that person had to be me. My brother remembers how I stepped in very kindly and was very good to him as a child. In my diary, I wrote about my unhappy and unstable childhood. Yet for Charles, I tried to be the one stable point in his ever-changing world. He has called me the big sister who mothered him. That role became my anchor. I remember his first day at Silfield, the local school we both attended. There's a photograph my father took of us that day, Charles in his little scarlet uniform. He remembers how excited he was to join his big sister. Meanwhile, he says that I looked, as he put it, half proud and half resentful that she's sharing the stage. But the truth is, I was overwhelmed with worry for him. Years later, his old teacher shared a story that brought me to tears. She told him that on his first day I just couldn't settle down in my own class. I was so jittery and anxious about how my little brother was doing. Finally, my teacher allowed me to go check on him. I returned to my classroom beaming with relief and announced, "Thank you, Charles seems to be doing fine." My education could wait. My first duty was to make sure he was okay. As he said, I was always very protective of him. Nighttime was the hardest for both of us. The darkness made the house feel even more empty. I had my own fear of the dark, a fear so strong I needed a light outside my door until I was 10. But I'd hear Charles crying down the corridor. Even though he remembers me being too scared to go to him, there were so many nights I fought that fear. I'd slip out of bed, my feet silent on the cold floorboards, and creep into his room. I'd sit on the edge of his bed and whisper stories, softly, until his crying stopped. I'd smooth his hair and promise him everything would be okay, that I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere. In those moments, I was no longer just a lonely, grieving girl. I became his guardian. I was making him a promise I knew deep down I could never break. This, more than anything, defined our childhood. On those unsettling weekend train rides between our parents' homes, I was the one holding his hand, trying to create a little bubble of stability in a life that was anything but. We even developed our own private language, a world built on shared glances and inside jokes. Together we were a fortress of two, standing strong against the chaos. It was a heavy burden for a child to carry, but it gave me a purpose I so desperately needed. The love I wished for from my mother I gave instead to my brother. When I look back, I realize this is where my capacity for empathy was born. My childhood pain didn't make me hard, it broke me open. It gave me a deep understanding of what it feels like to be sad, lonely, and unseen. Because I knew that feeling so well, I learned how to recognize suffering in others. Caring for my pets helped too, but my main focus was always Charles. By becoming his protector, I think I was, in some way, trying to save myself. I was trying to prove that I could be what our mother wasn't: constant. I was learning that love isn't just something you receive, it's something you do. It's a choice you make, every single day. For years, family was just a photograph in a silver frame. For me, a mother, a father, and smiling children. It was a picture-perfect image, nothing like my own fractured life. Chasing that perfect picture, and trying to fix what was broken, brought me a lot of sadness over the years. But the moment everything changed for me wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big confrontation, or a tearful reunion. It began as a quiet internal shift, a slow realization that would change the way I saw the world. This change happened gradually through the small, everyday acts of love shared between my brother and me. It was there in the silent understanding we had, even in a crowded room. It showed in the way we could make each other laugh when no one else could. It was present in the fierce loyalty that bound us, a bond forged by the challenges of our difficult childhood. Over time, I started to understand what we had. This fortress of two wasn't just a poor substitute for a real family. It truly was a real family. My whole life had been built around bloodlines and legacy. The Spencer name was supposed to mean everything, but my experience taught me something else. Family isn't about titles or who your parents are. It isn't guaranteed by blood. Family is about presence. It's about who shows up. It's about who holds your hand in the dark. It's about who you can count on, not because they have to be there, but because they choose to be. My brother chose to be there for me, and I chose to be there for him. In our shared vulnerability, we built something far stronger than the traditional family that had let us down. This didn't erase the pain. The scar from my mother's absence remained. Our relationship was strained and difficult for most of my life. Even on my wedding day, she seemed overwhelmed by the pressure, and I remember feeling let down. In the last months of my life, a painful silence settled between us. We hadn't spoken, and the letters she sent were returned unopened. The question of why never fully disappeared. Why did she leave? Why wasn't I enough? Over time, I learned to live with those questions. I realized that healing isn't about finding answers or changing the past. It's about building a meaningful life around the empty spaces. My painful childhood became my lesson in compassion. I knew what it felt like to be an outsider, to feel sad and unseen. That's why I could connect so deeply with others who were suffering. My charity work, whether sitting with AIDS patients when others were afraid to touch them, walking through landmine fields, or holding the hands of sick children, all came from that place of knowing pain. I wanted to give the world the comfort I had longed for as a child. In the end, my greatest mission was to build a different kind of family for my sons, William and Harry. I was determined to break the cycle. I wanted them to grow up knowing they were loved, not for their titles, but for who they truly were. I wanted them to feel the warmth of a mother's hug, to hear the words "I love you" spoken often and with feeling, so they would never ever doubt their place in my heart. Being their mother was the role I treasured most. It was the one place where I could finally create the emotional security I never had myself. The girl standing on the doorstep is still a part of me. Her longing was real and her sorrow was valid, but she isn't waiting anymore. She's learned that family isn't just something you're given, it's something you build. It's a bond forged in loyalty, in protection, and in those quiet moments when we simply show up for each other. The love I shared with my brother wasn't meant to replace a mother's affection. Instead, it was a different kind of love, one born from resilience and choice. Yet it was just as powerful and just as true. My story is only one among many. I know so many of you have found family in unexpected places and have built strength out of pain. If any part of this resonates with you, I invite you to share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Together, let's create a space where no one feels like they're waiting alone. The journey from the little girl sitting on those steps to the woman I am now was long and often painful. For much of my life, I was defined by an absence, the ghost of a mother I desperately missed. But in the end, that very absence taught me the true meaning of presence. It showed me that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strengths. The pain I felt was real, but so was the resilience it created in me. And the love I shared with my brother, and later offered to the world and my own children, wasn't just to fill what I had lost. It was the beautiful, powerful, and lasting result of that loss. It was the final answer to a question the little girl standing on the doorstep never dared to ask. I was enough.